right, we're going to go into two places. I want you to go with me into the book of Isaiah. Real quick, a couple announcements. I got a phone call today from Iki Elnor. How many know who Iki is? Iki's from Israel. He is with the ILI. The last time we saw Iki, he came in with the Knesset member. And the Knesset member actually left the Knesset. He got ill, and so he's no longer with the Knesset. But we got a phone call from Iki, and he's with the founder of the Israeli Leadership Institute. He is wanting to bring, I can't think of the gentleman's name, forgive me, but he is a general brigadier, the IDF in the Israeli Defense Force, who actually was in the 67-73 wars. He wants to bring him here. So he said he's got a lot of stories to tell. He was there. He was in the midst of all this, and he's an awesome guy. He said, what am I going to say? No? Of course, bring him. So I got the email first, and then Iki called today. But they are planning on coming November 9th. That'll be a Saturday evening. So everybody say November 9th. Mark it. Put it on your books. Bring a couple friends. This is a guy that you don't want to miss. He is a can you understand what a brigadier general? This is one of the top dogs. He is one of the guys that actually took on, I think it was by himself, he took on like 400 tanks or something like that. He was one of those guys that they had mentioned. So he's got some awesome stories. So we need to hear those stories from people who experience them. Yes, as I say, bring more than one friend. That'll be a good day. The mikvah is on the 7th. Everybody say mikvah. Mikvah is on the 7th, and I'm going to be teaching hopefully on that this Shabbat and sharing with you why we're coming into the month of Elul. And when you mikvah, it's a baptism. The whole month of Elul is about new beginnings. So we are in a season of new beginnings where we're coming into a new season. And then we prepare for the high holy days. But a mikvah is something that somebody does when they're beginning a new season. So folks who are undergoing a process of a new job, a new house, a new whatever. People will mikvah if they've had a bad health experience and then they're coming out of that. Mikvah is simply, in a sense, a baptism. But I'll explain what that is, why I believe everybody should experience the mikvah at least once. And how many have ever mikvahed before? So I would encourage you to come be a part of that. It's going to be awesome. That's going to be the 7th. We will not have Shabbat morning services here. We're going to do our mikvah service at the park. So it'll be at Pleasant Hill Park, fellowship, food, and you all know but it was just in my spirit to do things a little different this year. So instead of on a Sunday, we're going to do it on Shabbat. It'll be a Shabbat morning. So no morning service here. We will be experiencing the mikvah out there. How many will be in prayer with me for warm weather? So, man, those waters get cold. So they really do. So those are the questions. If any questions? Anybody have questions? Yes, Dr. Pete? Okay. And we're going to fill up some squirt guns, and when we see you next, we're going to squirt you when you come in from the mikvah waters. So we will miss you. Go with me into Isaiah. We're going to go to Isaiah, Yeshayahu 52:7. How beautiful on the mountains are the feet of him who brings good news, who announces shalom, who brings good news of happiness, and who announces salvation, or Yeshua, and who says to Zion, your God reigns. How beautiful on the mountains are the feet of him who brings good news. Everybody say feet. Now let's go into Ephesians. I know that there are several who have taught on this. And as we're coming into the month of Elul, never gets old. It never gets old. We're going to go into Ephesians. And I want you to see this from a messianic perspective, and maybe from the eyes of Rav Shaul. I'm going to ask somebody to read it for me. Ephesians 5. Ephesians 5. And I need a reader. 10 through 16. Ephesians 5. Who has it? Do you have it? Would you stand and read it for me? Just read it out loud. Ephesians 5, 10 through 16.
darkness, but instead expose them. For it is shameful even to speak of the things these people do in secret. But at everything exposed to the light is revealed clearly for what it is. And anything revealed is the light. This is what it says. Get up, sleeper, arise from the dead, and the Messiah will shine on you. Therefore, pay careful attention to how you conduct your life. Live wisely, not unwisely. Use your time well, for these are
Is that it? Okay. I want you to go with me to Ephesians. Stay there. I want you to find the verse that talks about the armor. I believe it's 6. Would you read that, Steve? I want you to see this. Yes, please.
Finally, be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Put on the full armor of God so that you are able to stand against.
And having done all, stand. It's interesting that Ephesians talks about standing. Everybody say stand. Steve, keep reading. Stand. There you go.
For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the powers, against the worldly forces of this darkness, and against the spiritual forces of wickedness in the heavenly places. Therefore, take up the full armor of God, so that you may be able to resist when the times are evil. And after you have done everything, to stand firm. Stand firm then. Buckle the belt of truth around your waist. Put on the breastplate of righteousness. Strap up your feet in readiness with the good news of Shalom. And above all, take up the shield of faith with which you will be able to extinguish all the flaming arrows of the evil one. Take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God.
Okay, you can stop there. I have heard even within our own body, we've talked about the imagery of this and Rav Shaul and what Paul or Rav Shaul is speaking about. And when he's talking about standing, and he says we're in a battle. How many know we're in a battle? We're in a battle, and there are spirits, and we battle those spirits. And we tend to think that when we're having a bad day that there's a spirit, and that could be. But understand, Rav Shaul or Paul is not just talking about little things. He's talking about there is spirits in high places. There's spirits over territories. How many of you know that? There's spirits over territories, over neighborhoods, over cities, over states. There's principalities and powers. And if we understood that concept, that our prayers are very effective, Rav Shaul is telling people, you need to stand against these things because they can affect your family, they can affect your home, they can affect your school. So you stand against that. And what he talks about is we're coming into the month of Elul in preparation. Everybody say Elul. Elul is the month of preparation before you get into the High Holy Days. I felt it appropriate that we talk about this, about standing. And about all of the things that Rav Shaul talks about within this. Some would say, even here today, that, and I respect this idea, but some would say that Rav Shaul is actually referring to the garments of the high priest. While that may be the case, I want to also point out that Rav Shaul was a Roman citizen. And he's speaking to what group? The Ephesians. Ephesus. So if I could say it this way, they are thinking probably with a Roman mindset. It's their culture. Now, you would have some that would be thinking about the high priesthood and the belt and all of on the high priest. But I'm going to talk tonight about a little bit about the feet and what he tells us. He says, having done all, he says, stand. When you think about standing, you should think about feet. When I had it was a blessing to be able to go down to Florida, and we went to Disney World. How many have ever been to Disney World? That was fun. Went to Disney World, but I made one mistake. I wore flip-flops. Don't ever wear flip-flops to when you're going on a long walk. You're walking through an amusement park, Cedar Point, or whatever. I found out about halfway through, my feet were hurting so bad, and just the little spots where there was really no support, and it was rubbing against my skin, and I had blisters. Now, the shoes were comfortable to wear during the day. You go to the grocery or whatever. But when you're on these long journeys and you're walking for miles and miles, before the day was over, I was dragging. I'm like, we just got to sit down somewhere because my feet are hurting. And by the end of the day, when we finally got off of that little tram that they take you, and we sat down, I went, my feet were just tired. Everybody say feet. Rav Scholes points out this way. He says one of the most important things in your battle, you've probably never thought about this before. One of the most important things is your feet. Your feet, your spiritual feet. And he says, make sure that you have on the shoes, everybody say shoes, the shoes of the preparation of the gospel of peace. Now, we tend to read that. And let me ask you a question. How many of you have ever read that or heard that in the Bible? We see hands. Everybody in the place has heard that. When was the last time you really thought about this? When he's telling us, we understand the helmet of salvation, the sword of the Spirit, the breastplate of righteousness. But shoes? Shoes? We talk about shoes. Shoes are very important. Shoes, tell me about shoes. What do you think? Why should we be concerned about shoes? Yes. So you're telling me that shoes help you to stand. It's your support. Everyone say support. See, these are key words. Rav Shaul is pointing some things out. Paul is pointing some things out, and he's telling us, pay attention to these things. There's something about the Roman soldiers' shoes. It affects your walk. How many of you have a good pair of shoes on tonight? You know that'll affect your walk? If you don't have a good pair of shoes on, your walk, it's going to affect how you walk. It'll affect how you stand. It'll affect how you feel. Tired feet affect the entire body. If your feet are tired, your whole body's going to be tired. So what Rav Shaul was saying is pay close attention to the shoes, your spiritual shoes, because in the day and age that you're having a battle, you need to make sure that you're standing, having done all. He says it 3 times about standing in the book of Ephesians. So we're called to stand. Everybody say stand. I believe he's telling us this too. Don't be weary in your walk. If you'll read this, he's saying don't be weary, and what we just read in Ephesians 5 was don't be weary in well-doing. That the darkness is all around us. There is darkness. We can't get weary in the good things that we do. And that's all connected to your feet, and it's all connected to your shoes. Now, I'm not talking about your physical shoes, but I'm talking about your spiritual shoes. How many of you have spiritual shoes on tonight? Everybody has a pair of spiritual shoes. It's just a matter of what they're wearing. Remember years ago when Jordan was big, basketball? Remember the shoes? Anybody remember those shoes? And Michael Jordan had come out with shoes, and everybody wanted those shoes. And there were collector's items, and people would spend big money on shoes because of the name brand on the shoe. Interesting. Everybody has a pair of spiritual shoes on as well. You just have to ask yourself, what shoes are you wearing? Put something on your feet. Turn to your neighbor and say, put something on your feet. So it's been said that the Romans conquered the world because of a good pair of shoes. Scholars have said Romans have conquered the world because of a good pair of shoes. If you're familiar with this term, and I see some hands, Pax Romanus. What was that? The Pax Romanus. Roman peace. That's the Roman peace plan. That was where they would go in, they would conquer a place, and then they would say, you have to line up with our ideals. You have to get on board with us now. You guys can run your place, but be on board with us. You have one leader now. It would be Caesar. Pax Romanus. It was a false peace. We will not let anything bad happen to you as long as you obey Caesar. And they had Roman shoes. We're going to talk about shoes tonight in the midst of battle. Dr. Pete? Yep, we're going to talk about that. Paul was a citizen of Rome. And when Paul's talking about weaponry, the Romans understood weapons. The Romans understood battle. So when Paul's teaching here, Rav Shaul, he's teaching with imagery. A good teacher will always teach with images. He'll paint images in your head to get you to see. Yeshua did it many times. He said what? Consider the birds. Look at the birds. You know how many, a little side note, but there were 200, from what I understand, there's over 200,000 types of one bird that flies through Israel, just 1 or 2 species alone. There's thousands and thousands of species of birds that fly and migrate through Israel in the winter days because they're going from Europe, they're going back and forth Europe to Africa, and they go flow right through Israel. So when Yeshua said, consider the birds, they knew what bird, there's all kinds of birds. So he's saying, look around, look at the birds. What about look at the lilies? Consider the lilies. Look at the grass. Look at the sparrows. So Yeshua's painting imagery. That's what Rav Shaul did as well. Yes. Bob? Wow, that's amazing. 500 million a year. Incredible. So Rav Shaul is pretty much doing the same thing here. And I want you to see some things about the Roman soldiers' shoes. We could call them this. We could call them killer shoes. So these were killer shoes. They had a job to do. The Romans just didn't throw a pair of shoes on, but they had specific style with their shoes. Their shoes were seen as weapons. Everybody say weapons. So the shoes began, I did a little bit of research on this. The shoes actually began, they would tie them at the top of their legs near their knees, and they would wrap them around, and then they would make their way. They'd put their shoe on, and it fit very tight, but it started at the top, and they would work their way down to the feet. It was leather, and they would take the leather and they would bind it with metal. And these were called, anybody know what those were called that went up to the leg? Yeah, that's exactly what they did, but they were called greaves. Everybody say greaves. Greaves. The greaves were made of leather and of metal, and what they would do is they protected the shin and the leg, and it was a form of protection. If you read in the book of Samuel, when David fought Goliath, it describes Goliath's clothing. So this goes all the way back even before the Romans. Read about it in the book of Samuel. It describes 1 Samuel 17, verse 6. If you get somebody, I want you to hear this, because if you hear it, you'll see it in your mind. Somebody turn there if you would. 1 Samuel, go to 17, verse 6. I'm going to ask somebody to read Psalm 147, verse 10. Psalm 147, verse 10. So look at 1 Samuel. I want you to hear this. 1 Samuel 17, verse 6. It's describing Goliath's getup. Okay? Who has it? Bob, did you read it?
17:6.
Yep.
He also has bronze shin guards on his legs and a bronze javelin slung between his shoulders.
Speaking of Goliath the giant, if you read it in the King James, it says greaves. Those greaves are the shin guards. They were the leather straps that were, the Romans did it a certain way. They put metal in there, and they would go and they would crisscross, and they would wrap them. And they wrapped them tight. Now what that did was that guarded the leg. Everybody say leg. It guarded the leg. Your feet are connected to, of course, are connected to your leg. But your whole walk is seen in your, it starts in the feet, and then it goes into the leg. The Roman shoes did not just guard the feet, but it also guarded the leg. It protected the leg of the people who were wearing them. Questions or comments? Yes, Roger. The shoes had protruding spikes that would come out. Now, some teachers teach this, not all teachers, but I've heard it said, that they had these spikes, these two spikes, and they would come out through the toes. Remember, these are called what? Killer shoes. That didn't mean they just looked good. They killed people. And they would, when they would get people down in battle, they could take these spikes and they would kick them. So they really did win with a good pair of shoes. Good question, Raj. Go with me. Who did I ask to read Psalms? Would you read it? I want you to see this, because our feet are also connected to our legs. And I want you to notice that Rav Shaul said that this was in connection to the legs. If you're going to stand, starts in the feet, and it's going to affect your legs. Having done all, Paul says to stand. Rav Shaul says to stand. So I want you to notice the connection to the legs and standing. Read this, 147, verse 10 of Psalms.
He delights not in the horse's strength, nor takes pleasure in a man's leg.
Keep reading.
And Adonai delights in those who revere him, and those who trust in his loving kindness.
So it's interesting, when I was younger and I read this, if you read it in the King James, it says the Lord or Adonai does not delight in a man's legs. And I went, huh? What does that mean? You know? Anybody remember the commercial years ago with Jim, what was that football player, guys? Joe Namath. And remember, he would shave his legs. And anybody remember that dumb commercial from way back when? And that's all I could think of. I'm like, what? What is that all about? But what he's saying is this. Thank you for that picture. What he's saying is this. Adonai, the legs represent strength. And Adonai does not take pleasure in a man's ability to say, look what I can do on my own. Don't need him. I can do it. I can stand. That's what Rome was all about. Roman soldiers, look what we can do in our own strength. And they were pretty strong boys. But he's saying, Adonai doesn't take pleasure in the strength of a horse. The horse had to do with the battlefield, also in a man's legs, in the battle of the standing. When is Adonai pleased? Not in when we say, well, look what we can do, or look how I can stand in my own strength. But he says, when is he pleased? What do you think? I thought I saw a hand. Yes. When he gets the glory. When he says, you trust me for strength. And so many times as men, we say, well, look, we're strong and we're going to be strong. But when we admit, we need your help, Father. We put up our hands and say, help. That's when he says, now, watch what I can do. Rav Shaul is giving us clues again to say, it's not so much in our own strength that we stand, it's in his strength that we stand. And having done all, he says, stand. And he says, you wear the shoes of the preparation of the gospel of Shalom. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. Everybody say shoes. So the legs represent man's own ability and man's strength. In a battle, they would break the legs of men because then they couldn't run off and then they could kill them. Okay, think about in the book of John, let's talk about Yeshua, who stood in the strength of Adonai, his father. Think about Yeshua, the Messiah. Did his faith ever break? Y'all were too quiet on that. Did Yeshua's faith ever break? No. When he went to the cross and he's hanging on the tree, they didn't break his legs. They came to the guy beside him, and they came to the other guy beside him, but they didn't break Yeshua's legs. And we often wonder why they didn't break his legs. Fulfilling scripture in Psalm 22, I believe it is, that talks about his legs will not be broken. Why? They would break the legs to hasten the death of the criminals on the tree. Why didn't they break Yeshua's? Well, he had already died, but understand this. I think that was symbolic to say Yeshua's faith was never broken. He never backed away. He always relied on the strength of his Father. In fact, that was the reason why he was hanging on a cross, was he said, Father, in your hands, I give it all to you. So that's a picture of him standing firm in faith. Yes, sir. Tested. Yeah. And that's a good point if you think about it, and I'm glad you brought that up. Not in my notes, but I want to talk about that, because if you think about that, Yeshua came knowing his purpose. Everybody say purpose. Yeshua knew his purpose. His purpose was not, hear me, it wasn't raising Lazarus. His purpose wasn't feeding the 5,000 and then the 7,000 with little fish and little crackers or bread. That was not his purpose. Although that was things that he did along the way. He raised the dead, he healed the sick, he healed the lepers, he healed the blind and the lame, he raised people up. But that wasn't his ultimate goal. The ultimate goal was the tree, the cross. How many would agree with me? That was the ultimate goal. So follow this. Could he have quit? If that was his mission and he knew, he's standing. The whole time he's standing. He's walking his journey out from the time he knew before he came to the face of the earth. That was his journey. That was what he was called to do. Amen? Could he have not done it? Did he have a choice? How many would say he had a choice? Turn your neighbor and say, Yeshua had a choice. Because he told him this. He said, don't you realize I could go like this? He said, I could call legions of angels. If one angel could wipe out 185,000 bad guys in the Tanakh, think about what a legion could do. All I have to do is say, Father, I say one word. But Yeshua said, I know what I'm here for. I know what I'm supposed to do. So Yeshua never faltered in that stand for what he was supposed to do. Rav Shaul is saying in Ephesians 6, don't falter in what you're supposed to do. Keep standing. All hell and high water is going to come against you. You keep standing. And it all goes back to the shoes. What is your support? So let me ask you, what's your support? What's your support? What do you base your whole life on? Is it money? Is it a job? Is it a good family? Listen, those things are nice. But what is it that we base our stand in life on? What is it that we are standing on? What is it? Faith in Adonai. And his what? His word. What's the word? Yeshua. Ultimately, it's Yeshua. He's the living Word. And so what is Rav Shaul saying? No matter what comes, he said, have your feet bound with the gospel, the good news of what? Of shalom. What is shalom? Peace or what? Wholeness. Nothing missing and nothing broken. How many would like to have wholeness, total wholeness? Wow. He's telling the believers, if everything comes against you, I don't care what it is, he's saying this, stand in the fact that you know Yeshua and you know what you're supposed to do. Don't let anybody shake you. And we think we have it bad today. In that day, they had it bad as well. There were people who came against them. There were Jewish people who the others said, what do you mean you're not, what are you doing? Why are you believing in that guy Yeshua as the Messiah? And there were people who would come against him. I found it interesting. Do you realize that at the time of the destruction of the Second Temple, do you realize this? At the time of the destruction of the Second Temple, 1 in 4 Jewish people believed in Yeshua as the Messiah. That's a lot of people. Some people say it was up to 1 million Jewish believers in the land in that day and around the land. 1 million people. Book of Acts says 10,000 times 10,000. There was a lot of Jewish believers. But when Bar Kokhba declared, when Rabbi Akiva declared Bar Kokhba as the Messiah, Romans had surrounded Israel. They had surrounded Jerusalem. Get the picture. They were all fighting together, standing against Rome. But when the Rabbi Akiva said, wait a minute, Bar Kokhba is the Messiah, the believers who believed in Yeshua went, we can't fight with you guys anymore. Because Yeshua said, when you see these things happen, when you see Jerusalem surrounded, go for the hills. So the Jewish believers went, that's our sign, we're out. The other Jewish people said, you guys are cowards, you should be fighting with us. And they said, no, Messiah told us, when we see the Roman soldiers surround, we got to get out. So that it caused a split. Now here's what's interesting. Titus, at that time, Titus called the siege off for whatever reason. History doesn't tell us why, but for whatever reason, a little window in time, Titus called the siege off of Jerusalem. And there was a window of opportunity for the believers to leave and get out. After they left, the siege was back on. But throughout history, Jewish believers in Jesus or Yeshua have always had to take a stand for what they believe in. Even today, I told you about the guy that ordained me. He comes from, he's going to be an Orthodox rabbi. Came to believe in Yeshua as Messiah. His mother, they had a funeral for him. They had a literal funeral for this guy in his house, that is, at his parents' house. He came to the door. I said, you ever see? He came to the door. He knocked on the door. His mother was screaming. His dad, they're tearing their clothes. They're saying, my son died. My son died. Who are you? That's having to stand for your faith. Now, I don't think any of us have ever done that. But that's an extreme. But think about it. What are the things that come against us that try to shake our shalom, that try to take our shalom, that try to rock our faith? What is it? What do you think? What is it that tries to shake our shalom and take our faith as believers? Because they did it in the same day. You think it's bad? Rav Shaul, those people experience the same thing that we do today. Maybe not so much on a great scale as we do, but their culture was bad. It was bad. The seaports, the cities, it was bad, guys. Questions or comments? Yes?
I was thinking in the moment when you said, talking about what makes us think we give up, compromise and things that cause us to come to the Lord. Nobody thinks of us.
Yeah. I heard a teaching this week that it made me stop and think about some things. And he was talking about the sinner's prayer, and he said, America as a whole, we put a whole lot of faith into the sinner's prayer, which I do believe in the sinner's prayer. We accept Yeshua. It has to start somewhere. You ask him in. I believe that. But he said a lot of people, they stop there. They say, now we're saved. We've said the prayer, so now we're saved. And he said, and people live like what they want to do. He said, there is coming a time where they'll find out. He said, the real test, how many of you would like to know if you're really saved? He said, the real test, and he pointed it out in Scripture, he said, the test is this. He said, will you be walking it up until the very end of your life? That's the test to see if you're really a true believer. Yeshua said this. He said, a true disciple is one who would continue till the end, a true disciple. There are many followers. We talked about followers versus disciples. Followers will follow from a distance. Maybe they like the food or the music or whatever. Followers will follow at a distance. True disciples will follow Yeshua's ways up until the last breath. That may offend some. Got quiet in here, Alice. But think about that. Are we really real disciples? I'm not saying we don't make mistakes, but what I'm saying is, will we always come back to that place of shalom in Him, that He is the final word in our lives? Doesn't mean we're not going to make mistakes. And even there are believers who will sin. If they sin, they're not going to find shalom in their sin. They'll always come back home if they're true believers in the Messiah. Y'all with me on that? They'll always come back home. They'll never be comfortable in sin. The world is comfortable in sin. Non-believers are comfortable. They like sin. It's fun to them. What did Rav Shaul say? He said, the world says, eat, drink, and be merry. Tomorrow we're going to die. Who cares? If that's the case, Paul said, then we're the worst of all people, because we're the saddest of all people if that's the case. How many of you know that's not the case? There is a payday coming. So, yes, I saw some hands. A couple hands, actually. Yes. Yes. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. What bothered me about that, we were talking about one of the leaders of Hillsong, and a wonderful song composer. The guy is a worshiper, but he says he believes he's losing his faith. Here's what scared me, or it doesn't scare me, it concerns me when somebody says, and it doesn't bother me that I'm losing my faith. That's scary. He said he's losing his faith and it doesn't bother him that he's losing his faith. If he were to say, I'm struggling and somebody talk with me or somebody help me because I'm really disturbed in my spirit, then I'd say, okay, the boy's going to be all right. But when somebody says it doesn't bother me, wow, that's scary. That means where is your relationship? Do you really know Him? Did you ever really know Him? So, yes, sir, I saw your hand. That's a good point. That's a good point. So when Paul says this, and he says, having done all, stand, with your shoes of the preparation of the gospel of shalom. That is the good news of Messiah. And he's saying, don't let anybody shake you of leaving that. That's your shalom. That's your stability in life. Wherever you walk, because your shoes are on your feet, whatever your journey is, whatever place you go to, whatever house, whatever school, whatever job, whatever people you come into contact with, whatever trial or trouble or situation, he said, always remember your foundation, where your feet stand. Know where you stand, guys. Where do you stand in your faith tonight? Are you strong? When the times come and the shaking starts, are we going to stand? Or are we going to go, well, he never was faithful, so how many know he's faithful? I can look around the room and I see every person, and I see how he's been faithful to a lot of you in this building, and myself included. No matter what comes, he's always faithful. Don't walk away from that. He's always faithful. Never leave the Messiah. Don't leave what you started out in, because he's always faithful. He'll finish it. He'll finish it. So that's why I say, if you really want to know if you're a true disciple or not, know that he'll finish what he started in you. Don't worry about so much if you see people who, even in your own families, they seem like they're walking away. If they're real believers, he'll finish what he started. Is he not able to finish what he started? Sure he is. So if they truly are believers and they were sincere, he'll finish. If they belong to him, he'll bring them back home. He'll take care of it. I know families that struggle with wayward kids and families that some of their loved ones are out and they left their faith. And I say, if they really believed, you trust him. He's got them. You don't ever give up praying for them. Amen? So the greaves, everybody say greaves. The greaves were these things. We haven't even talked really about the shoes yet. But the greaves protected the legs. Everybody say protection. They protected your calves when you walk through rough terrain, rocks and thorns. So the shoes of shalom will protect you while you walk in the rocky places. I want to say that again. The shoes of shalom, your shalom shoes, everybody say shalom shoes. Your shalom shoes are going to protect you when you walk through the rocky places. So what do I mean by that? When life gets tough and you walk through, you have good news. You know the good news. Your shalom is Messiah. He's the foundation. Paul or Rav Shaul is talking about battles. And this is not a short-term battle. This is not just a one-time thing or a one-day thing. He's talking about battles that it's ongoing. And he's saying no matter what, he's saying these shoes will protect you in your journey. Don't leave that. Keep your mind focused. Know who you are in Him. Know who He is in you. And stand, having done all. Stand. Don't let the trials push you down. The enemy will always try to push you down. It's like that king of the hill. Anybody played that as kids? We'd like the kids to come up and we'd be up on the hill and we'd push them down to try to keep them off the hill. The enemy will try to do that. He'll try to steal. He'll try to pull you down. Trials and troubles and situations. You have to stay your mind on Him. Turn your neighbor and say, stay your mind on Him. So let me ask you while we have some time, what would you consider our rocky, thorny places as believers? Because the greaves protected the soldier's legs from the rocks and the thorns in the battle and in the journey. What do you think, guys? What's our rocky, thorny places? Yes, Amy. Okay. Tell me, what do you think? With culture, she said culture. Culture is not very popular right now with believers. I'm talking about true believers. Not very popular. I mean, think about it. God, I say God, but I say Elohim, Adonai. Yeshua is not popular with the world culture. Never has been. Not the real Yeshua. So, what do we do with that? How do we handle that? When everything in our culture tells our kids, how many of you have kids or grandkids? Wave at me. So how are we going to handle that when the culture says, and it will affect our families. What do we do? So I'm asking you guys, what do we do? Yes, sir. Live by example. Let them see. Our kids are watching. Do you realize that kids really need somebody to see them stand for what's right? They need to see that. They need to see it. What else? Good. That's a good answer. What else? Yes, sir. Prayer. Yeah. Prayer. Good point. Tom? Okay. Prayer and trust. Yeshua said, will I find faith when the Son of Man returns? Will I find faith on the earth? Yes, Tom Culp. Good point. Our words, speaking in, and when you speak, make a stand. Having done all stand, make a stand. Stand with your words for what's right. Yes, sir.
I would say conversation.
That's a good point. Good point. Amy? Good point. All right, so all of these could be our thorny places. Trials will be your thorny places too. Culture can be, trials can be your thorny places. You're walking through, a trial comes along, shakes your faith. I think of Susie Beckwith's nephew right now. She's not here tonight, but Susie, anybody familiar with what happened there? Gosling was his name, I believe. Or no, what was his? I forget his last name. He's a gentleman who had Boggs, thank you. He had several kids. His wife was pregnant, and they were coming back from church. They were traveling down, I believe it was 545, if I'm not mistaken. There was another guy he was coming up to the stop sign. He turned around to correct his kids, ran the stop sign, hit Mr. Boggs' car, and instantly killed several of the children. A couple of them were taken to the hospital, and that man lost his children and his pregnant wife coming home from church. You look at that, and I think about that, and I think, the first question is, why? He's coming back from church. I mean, we ask ourselves, why, where were his angels, and why did that happen? We have a lot of questions. I'm sure that man has a lot of questions, too. Why did that have to happen? We don't have all the answers. But hear me when I say this, You always come back to that foundation of what's your support. In the end, what's your support? What are you going to believe? That man knows where his family is. Now, he could just give up, lay down, and die, whatever. But he's not. He's making a stand. You got to be hard for him. Pray for him. His name is Mr. Boggs. Forget his first name, but pray for him. John. John? Is it? Josh. Keep him in prayer. That's a tough, I can't imagine that. These are trials and troubles that happen to the believer. They happen to Rav Shaul in great detail as well. Shipwrecked twice, bitten by snakes, beaten, flogged, whipped with, on the bottom of the feet with what do they call that? Their rods, and they would be strong rods of bamboo and sometimes even metal. They'd try to bust the feet up so that he couldn't stand. That guy had all kinds of things happening to him. But he always came back to that place of what's my support? Why am I walking the way I'm walking? All Paul had to do, all Rav Shaul had to do was back off, not press the faith. In fact, he could have lived a nice, quiet life in a nice little Jewish community somewhere, maybe outside of Brooklyn. Well, maybe not Brooklyn, but he could have very well easily lived a nice, quiet life, but he pressed on in his faith. And so when you press on, you're going to see the adversary attack you. I want you to know that. It doesn't matter today if you're 30 or if you're 97. You're going to see the adversary try to hit you from your stand. Discouragement, despair, he always tries. You have to come back to that place of knowing what's your walk all about. What's your stand? How many are going to say, I'm going to stand? So make sure that your shoes are on right. I just need a couple readers here, and I'm going to run out of time. 1 Samuel 2:9, and then Psalm 94:18. 1 Samuel 2, verse 9. Who wants to read that? Real quick. 1 Samuel 2:9. And then Psalm 94:18. We're going to talk about standing in His shalom. That's your foundation. Not our shalom, His shalom. It's all about Him. It's about His work in us. So 1 Samuel 2:9, who has it? Bob?
He guards the steps of his godly ones, but the wicked are silenced in darkness. For one does not prevail.
Okay. He's guarding the steps, the walk of the godly ones. So He's got you. Whatever you're going through, He's got it. Go with me to Psalm 94:18. Who has that one? So we're talking about standing in shalom, that it's our foundation. His shalom is our foundation. Who has it? Yes, Ted?
If I say, my foot is slipped, your mercy has been.
So even if I say my foot has slipped, and we're talking about feet and shoes and standing, even in those times where our feet do slip, we always come back to Adonai's mercy. That word for mercy, everybody say hesed. Chesed. That is His mercy. That is His loving kindness. If we fall, His mercy will pick us up again. Isn't that good news to know there's some support there? That He has our back? In case anything, He's got our back. Turn to your neighbor and say, He's got your back. So the Greaves gave the soldier protection so that he could keep walking. And that's what I want to share with you tonight. Keep walking. Just keep walking. Keep doing what you're supposed to be doing. Don't let the enemy hold you back. These Greaves also defended the soldiers from the adversary's kicks. The legs could not be broken. Let's talk about the bottom of the shoe. At the bottom of the shoe, they had these little spikes. They were like little nails. And Roger, this is what you were referring to. This gave the soldier stability. So at the bottom of the shoe, it was kind of like cleats. And he had these little cleats, but they were real sharp. So that gave him stability in the walk. That gave him stability. Everybody say stability. There was a stability in the walk that when he went into those hills and onto the grass and the hills, that there was some stability there. He wouldn't slip and he wouldn't fall. Except for one time you had to be very careful. There's a writing, Josephus tells us that during one of the times when the Roman soldiers came into Jerusalem, one of these Roman soldiers, he's a real big guy, and he came in and he was attacking people. But his cleats on the bottom of his shoes hit that pavement, and it was wet, and up he went. And all the guys came in and attacked him while he was down on the ground because he lost balance when he hit that pavement with the cleats. They weren't too good on the pavement in Jerusalem, but on the hills. How many have ever been to that pavement in Jerusalem? But on the hills, if you had cleats, it made you stand. So there was some stability. Rav Shaul is telling us, having done all, stand with the shoes of the preparation of the gospel of Shalom. That is not only your support in your walk, but that's also your stability. How many know as believers we have to have a stable walk? Say this with me. I need a stable walk with Messiah. So what does that mean? That means that you get some stability in your walk. You can't just have no stability. You've got to have some stability in your walk with the Messiah. That means there should be times where you have set aside to spend time in prayer. There's times you should set aside to read the Word. Stability. There's times where you come to congregation. Stability. If you don't have any stability, it's very easy because then the enemy can come in. If he can't get you this way, he'll hit your stability. If you see people who are not stable, the enemy can go after them and he can take them down real quick. So you have to get a pattern of stability, even not just in our own spiritual walk, but also within ourselves. Got to have that. Amen?
Be careful with that because you can be unstable physically and not in your spirit.
Oh, sure.
I have vertigo and I'm very unstable physically.
Rav Shaul is not speaking about physically. He's referring to people's spirit. But when and think about the lesson in that, when you have it in your body, think about that. If you have vertigo and you are unstable, you can fall. So Rav Shaul is saying, have some support, have some stability. Now let me ask you the question. Alice, what do you do when you have that vertigo? Do you just let it go? Do you run out into the fields and go, hey, this is fun?
No, I don't.
Okay, I knew you didn't. So what do you do?
I use a cane or a walker to give me stability.
To give you stability. And you might even take something to help you with that, to balance that out.
I've learned not to.
Oh. Okay, well, the whole point is this. Find something, if you find yourself like that in the Spirit, find something that is going to help you to stand having done all. But I think there's a key here, and we should think about this. Recognizing when we are unstable. See, in the natural, you know when you're unstable. But in the physical, sometimes we miss it. There can be whole communities of people who don't recognize that there's some instability there. Turn to your neighbor and say, be stable. So let me just hit just a couple more, guys. Where do I want to go with this? How about, just real quick, Romans 5:2, who has it? I'll give you just a couple here. I need some readers. Romans 5:2. Who wants to read it for me? Romans 5:2, real quick. Nobody wants to read it. I need to if we're going to get through this. Yes, Bruce, Romans 5:2. Roger, would you please read 1 Corinthians 15, 1 and 2? Bob, I'm going to ask you to read 2 Corinthians 1:24. Steve, I'm going to ask you to read Galatians 5:1. David, where are you? I know you're here. I saw you. Would you mind reading, go with me to 2 Thessalonians 2, verses 15 and 17. So we're talking about standing. So when you stand, I want you to see something. Let's go to Romans 5:2. Who had that? Does somebody read it? Whoever. Yes, sir, please.
Romans 5:2. Through him we also have gained access by faith into his grace, and boast in the hope of glory.
So notice this, in your spiritual walk, we're talking about the shoes of the gospel of Shalom. In your spiritual walk, notice this, the very first thing is you're standing in his grace. It's all about his grace, not about our works. Now, having said that, it doesn't mean we quit working. It just means that this whole thing is about Adonai's grace. It sounds like an oxymoron, doesn't it? But it means that you have to trust in his grace and what he's done for us at the tree. Your salvation is not in your works. Your salvation is seen through what you do, but your salvation is because of Yeshua's work. Everybody got that? How many would say yes to that? Do you know the stability in that thought? There's such a freedom in that thought to say, I know that he has bought me and paid a price for me. The blood of Messiah has set me free from what? Sin and death. The blood of Messiah he's bought me. I'm his. How many could say that tonight? There's a lot of people that try to earn it. They say, well, we're going to earn it. if I do so many good deeds, if I give so much money to the congregation, if I give so much money to the poor people and help this person and that person, then I'm going to stand. I actually had one guy tell me that once. He said, if he does so much and he says that the scales will be tipped, that's not the message of the good news of Messiah. Yeah. There's people that tend to rely on what they can do to get them into the kingdom. Well, the reason why we do it is because he's already called us into the kingdom. Right? So that's where we have to be careful and not get caught up in that mindset. Good works is good. That's called a mitzvot in Hebrew. We're expected to do good works, but that doesn't bring us into the kingdom. We do it because we love him. That's a mitzvot. And we love each other, right? Not because there's a part of us that says we have to, but that's a good thing. We really should feel that way a little bit, I think, because if we feel like, well, we don't have to do it, then I think we're in trouble. Go with me. It's a whole other message. Go with me. Who had 1 Corinthians 15? Roger? 1 and 2. So we stand in his grace. There's your shalom. Standing in the chesed, the loving kindness of Adonai through Yeshua the Messiah. Roger?
Now I make known to you, brothers and sisters, the good news which I proclaimed to you. You also received it, and you took your stand on it, and by it you are being saved if you hold firm to the word I proclaimed to you, unless you believe without proper consideration.
Notice what he said. They're standing in the good news of Messiah. But he said you have to hold firm to it. Don't back away from it. Keep walking in this thing. It raises a whole question there. I mean, people, I do believe in eternal security. If you truly love him, you will walk it out. Let's go to the next, please. 2 Corinthians 1:24. Who had that? Bob?
Not that we lord it over you in matters of faith, but we are fellow workers for your joy, for in the faith you are standing.
Notice they're standing firm. They're not backing away. In the days of Rome, if you were believers, they would round you up and they would consider you to be entertainment. They would take you to the Colosseums, not to sit and have dinner. They would take you to the Colosseums and you would be brought into the underground chambers. They would do it with children. They would do it with women. They did it with men. They didn't care who it was. If they were believers in Yeshua, Jew or Gentile, they all looked the same to the Romans. And they would have fun with them. I say fun facetiously. It wasn't fun. What they would do is they would have wild bears. They would have tigers, lions, panthers. There were underground chambers. They would put them in these chambers, and then they would open the door, and they would let them push them out into the Colosseum. On the other side of the Colosseum, they would open another door, and out would come the wild animals. The wild animals would come out and make sport. They would chase the people around. They would kill them. They would eat them. And they would maybe have, in their minds, have a little bit of fun with these believers. So here's a little knife, protect yourself. Here's a stone, protect yourself. And the Romans, they would fill Colosseums up and they would cheer as they would watch children and women and men being eaten by these animals. They stood for their faith. When Rav Shaul said, having done all stand, he knew what they were going through. Thank God we don't see that in our country. Not yet. I hope we never see it like that. Yep. Persecution. Now when we make a statement to say that it's not politically correct to say, wait a minute, you're not a woman, you're a man dressed as a woman. How many know that's not politically correct? And so now we're coming into a season where they're saying, you can't say that. You can't say that. I thought about that the other day. I thought about, well, what if? I said, I watched as there were some men that got in trouble because they dressed as women. They wanted to be addressed as a woman, and they threw them out. These people came. They threw them out. They got into a big fight. I said, well, I wonder if I would get in trouble if I told everybody I was a dog. I went into a restaurant, and I just started chewing things up, chewing things and biting things. I said, they couldn't prosecute me because that's what I truly would feel if I said that. And I dress as a dog. I said, how could they prosecute you if you said that you were a dog? You went around, you acted like a dog. Yeah, and then they put you in a cage. But my point, we need to love everybody, guys. But my point is this. Here's my point. If we make statements that are not politically correct, we're going to be persecuted for that. And that's just a small persecution. What's going to happen when they, and I say they, when the government demands that churches or congregations have to marry same-sex couples. Will people stand for that? Some will, some won't. Some will say we can't do it, and they will make a stand having done all. I'm not saying you don't love people, but how many know that's against Adonai's word? That's against the Torah. You're not supposed to do that stuff. So some already are. There are. I could give you examples of bishops. There are bishops in England, even in America, that are saying there's nothing wrong with it. They're in trouble. And they wonder why the traditional churches are fading fast. They're not standing. There are people within our generation, I see your hand, there are people within our generation in our society, young people, that want to see people stand for what's right. They want to see it. But not a lot of people are. That's why the churches, again, are dying out. Not all of them. But they want to see somebody make a stand for what's right. Crazy world we live in. Tom, you had your hand up. She stood for her faith. And her family continues to stand. Her uncle, Rachel's uncle, continues to travel and speak about that story. He has his own ministry where he does. He didn't give up his stand because of that bad thing happening. What kept his walk in Messiah? The shoes of the shalom of trusting in Messiah. It's all about even when you're in those hard times. Real quick, we got a couple more here. Galatians, who has Galatians 5:1? Who'd I give that to? Yes. Steve?
For freedom, Messiah set us free. So stand firm and do not be burdened by a yoke of slavery again.
Okay, what was he talking about? The Torah? You're saved now, so you don't have to pay attention to that Old Testament stuff. That's what he's saying? No. I personally believe he's talking about the man-made traditions and rules that were surrounding the Torah observation. For example, I could give you a lot of examples on this, but there's examples where there were fences that were set around the Torah, and there were fences around fences. There were rules and regulations that the rabbis of the day said, this is how you have to do it, and this is how you have to do it. For example, do you realize that according to the Shulchan Aruch, which is a rabbinic writing, they go past the Torah, they say you have to keep Shabbat. Well, in order to keep Shabbat, there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of laws that are around keeping Shabbat, according to the rabbinic sages. And so the Shulchan Aruch says, wait a minute, you have to be careful about even your hairbrush on Shabbat. How many of you brush your hair on Shabbat? Okay. So you have to be careful, because if you use a brush that is a boar's brush or and if you pull out a hair, guess what? According to the Shulchan Aruch, you have broken the Sabbath. Because you tore out a hair, it was work. If you open your refrigerator on Shabbat and the light comes on, you have created a fire. You all with me? That's according to some of the traditions today of what the rabbis say. Not on the Shulchan Aruch. That was written way back when. But what they're saying is, they're saying, now what do you do if you've created a fire on Shabbat? You've broken the Sabbath. So that's a law, a fence around a fence. So, and then here's the kicker. You can't shut the door now. Now you have to consult your rabbi to say, what do I do? Because I've created a fire in my refrigerator on Shabbat. Are you seeing how the burdens of Shabbat? See what I'm saying? There are people who, and we do it in the churches too, guys. People who do it in the churches too. There are laws around laws around laws. Listen, it's not that hard to follow the Messiah and obey his commands, right? How many know it's not that hard? So we're talking about, back to Galatians, I don't think that he's telling them, forget the Torah now and put all that Old Testament stuff away, which some people teach. I think he's telling them, look, don't get into the bondages of what the rabbis are saying. There's fences around fences. Thousands of rules and laws and regulations. I'll never forget a lady that I met years ago. She was at the library. Stephanie Garber was her name, a traditional Jew from Cleveland. She was a writer from Cleveland. And she wanted to interview me one time. This was way back when. She wanted to interview me, and so I sat down, and she's asking me all these stories for the Cleveland, it was a Cleveland newspaper. And she is just, no, it wasn't the Plain Dealer, No, it was one of the Cleveland Jewish newspaper, the big one. And so this is all the Jewish community. It's a newspaper. And she wanted to interview little old me. And I'm like, why interview me? And so she's asking me all these questions. And so I told her my testimony. And then afterwards she said, she said, let me share this with you. She said, her whole goal in interviewing me, she said, I really wanted to find some and say bad stuff about you. She said, I was going to say bad stuff about you. She said, after hearing you, she said, I can't say anything bad about you. She said, I heard your testimony. It was the testimony of the Mashiach that met her heart. And she said, I can't write what I wanted to write. Interesting. So my point is this, as talking to her, we got to talking and we had a little friendship going on. I'd go into the library. She worked at this library. She said, she said, my son is studying. And she said, he's now into studying trees. And I said, trees, huh? She said, she said, there are so many books and writings in Judaism on just the trees, the codification of the blessing of the trees and the types of trees. She said, he's driving me crazy with these trees. All these trees, she said, if I hear about trees again, books upon books upon books. So what is he saying? He's saying, don't get so bogged down about the traditions of men. I don't think he's saying throw out every tradition, because he talks about some traditions are good. But don't let those traditions rob you of your joy of serving the Master. Amen? Amen. Okay, we're almost done here. We had a couple more. We didn't even get to what I wanted to. Who had 2 Thessalonians 2, 15 and 17? Was it David? I think it was David, wasn't it? Well, one of you guys, go ahead and share it. Somebody share it. Go ahead. Is it up there? So then, all right, let's all read it together. So then, brothers and sisters, stand firm, hold on to the traditions which you were taught, whether by word of mouth or by our letter. So he's saying there are some traditions that are good. You stand firm in those traditions that are good, not the traditions that there's thousands of rules and regulations. There are some traditions that are very good, like praying with a prayer shawl. That's a good tradition. Okay? There are other traditions. Standing for the Shema is a tradition. There's some traditions that are good. My point, I hope you're getting what I'm saying. Not all traditions are bad. Well, see, all those traditions, now we just throw them out the window. No, we don't throw them all out. But the ones that hold you back from serving with joy, you might want to question. I'm going to send you home with just one more thought on this. Can I give you one more thought? So the spikes were a weapon in front of the shoes to decimate a downed enemy. But he says, shod your feet. Everybody say, shod your feet. Hupodeomai. That's a strange word, isn't it? But it means to bind under your feet. The Greek is this, to take the shoes of the gospel of shalom and bind them tight under your feet. Everybody say bind tightly. Listen, your shalom has to be bound tight to your walk. If your shalom is loose, you're going to have a hard time. You have to bind the shalom of Messiah tightly to your walk. That means you know who you serve. You continue to do it no matter what cost. No matter all the attacks. Bind tightly the shoes. You ever had loose-fitting shoes? I saw a pair on the internet. I really liked them. I like shoes, sorry, but I just do. I saw them. I liked them. I bought them. Well, European shoes are sized differently than, and if they're made in China, then they're real small. These were bigger. And so I like the shoes. They're beautiful, but they're so big that my feet were like this much. And I thought, well, I just bought these dumb things. So I took paper and I stuffed them in. So at least my feet are like tight in there when I'm walking. You'll never see it, but in those I could feel it. Those shoes are loose. You can't walk. You can't run. Your journey, you're like all over the place. So what I would say is this in closing. Make sure that the shoes of the preparation of the gospel of shalom, your shalom has to be bound tightly to your walk. That means you stay close. You keep your shalom. Don't let anything steal your shalom. If the adversary knows that he has a foothold, he will take your shalom every time. So turn to your neighbor and say, bind the shalom tight to your feet. Firmly tie it. Firmly tie it. The shalom in our lives, the affairs of life. Firmly tie the Messiah's shalom to our walk in him. So having said all that tonight, as we're coming into the season of Elul, preparation, we're in a battle. It's a battle. The enemy's he has a fight for your soul. And as we're coming into growing in the Messiah and knowing the Messiah more in these days ahead, these are just little clues to say, what can we do, Rabbi? This is one way to retain your walk and grow in your walk in Him. How many know we're never done growing? You're not done yet, guys. So we continue to walk this out and stand firm. Stand with me. I want to send you out with a prayer real quick. Father, I thank you for every person in this place, and I ask you to help us to stand in the shoes of shalom and help us, Father, to bind that tight to our walk and to our feet. May we give no place to the adversary. May we continue to be strong through trials and through just life. Help us, Father, to be strong in Yeshua. May your chesed make us strong. We thank you for your grace and your chesed in the mighty name of Yeshua the Messiah. All his people said amen. Give somebody a hug before you leave, guys. Shalom, shalom.